All rise, veuillez vous lever. The International Criminal Court is now in session. L'audience à la Cour pénale internationale est ouverte. Please be seated. Veuillez vous asseoir.
Good morning, everyone. Court officer, please call the case.
Good morning, Mr. President, Your Honors. This is the situation in the Central African Republic II, in the case of the prosecutor versus Alfred Affaire Yekatom and Patrice Edward M Ngai ssona, case reference ICC 0114-0118, and for the record, we are in open session.
Thank you. Ask for the appearance of the parties. You are not completely unchanged, Mr. van der Poel, if I see correct.
That's correct, Mr. President. Good morning to you. Good morning, Your Honors. Good morning, everyone. Today, the prosecution is represented by Thomas Oya, Lorenzo Canonico, Yassine Mosfa, Pierre Belbenovic, Maria Berdinikova, Lucio Garcia, Olivia Straven, and myself. Good morning again.
Thank you, Mr. van der Poel. Ms. Rabasantratana for the victims' representatives.
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, good morning, Your Honor. Good morning, members of the court. We're the same composition as yesterday. Mrs. Mangosita and myself, Isabelle Samba Tamba.
You have to switch off. You have to switch off your microphone. No problem. But the name is really not easy, and we had enough time to practice it, frankly speaking. So, and now for the representatives of the former child soldier.
Good morning, Mr. President. Good morning, Your Honors. Good morning, everybody in the courtroom. Anne Grabowski for the former child soldiers today.
Thank you. I turn to the defense. First of all, the defense of Mr. Yekatom, Ms. Dimitri.
Good morning, Mr. President. Good morning, Your Honors. Good morning, everyone. Mr. Yekatom is present in the courtroom, represented today by Ms. Sarah Bafadel, Ms. Anta Gise, Ms. Sabrine Beysat, Mr. Guillaume Suzuki, and myself, Milen Dimitri.
Thank you. Mr. Knoops.
Very good morning, Mr. President, Your Honors. Good morning, everyone in the courtroom. We are in the same composition as yesterday, Mr. President. Thank you.
Well, that spares some time, frankly speaking. And good morning, Mr. Ngai ssona. You have still the floor for your unsworn statement, and you may continue.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ladies and gentlemen of the bench, I'd like to continue my declaration, my statement, where we stopped yesterday.
Une fois à Bangui,
Once in Bangui, Madame Sangopanza asked us to follow her to the palace for a cocktail that was organized in the president's banqueting room. This is where we met up with a certain number of VIPs and other members of her family who were there in great numbers. During these festivities, someone from the entourage of the presidents came towards us to give us a sum of 1 million CFA francs. I took this money without asking any questions because I was aware that it came from the hands of the president. It was her director of the cabinet who had given it to me, Mr. Mabingi. I didn't see if he were also other people such as Dafan Sayo and others who were also with us there on the plane. This money was used in order to implement the Brazzaville agreements, in order to carry out the awareness-raising work on the ground in accordance with what was said in that agreement. After the agreements were signed in Brazzaville, I took the decision to send the leaders of the Anti-Balaka resistance to meetings concerning their demands, because they were well placed to be able to say exactly what they want for their troops on the ground, for their elements on the ground. As for me, I simply agreed to be part of the monitoring or follow-up committee of the agreement. Our mission as a follow-up committee was to monitor the effective implementation of the Brazzaville agreements by all the different parties, working together with the government and the international community. Working with the government and international community, we ensured that the agreements were respected. We had to make sure that each side respected the terms of the agreement, and we had to follow up and monitor on the ground. Your Honor, judges, distinguished members of the court, the President was to set up a new government as a consequence of the Brazzaville Forum. A few weeks later, the President began consultations with the different driving forces of the nation in order to appoint a new Prime Minister. I supported the candidacy of Mahamat Kamoun, and I let this be known to the President, Madame Catherine Samba Panza. The President of the National Transition Committee, the CNT, that supported the candidacy of Karim Mekwassa, was unhappy with Kamoun's nomination or appointment and agreed with Sébastien Ouenezoui to go and see the mediator of the Central African crisis, President Sassou Nguesso, in order to have the decree annulled. That is how I came up with the idea to call the Congolese Director of Intelligence, the Director General of Intelligence, to inform him that the anti-Balaka resistance fighters had proposed the name of Mahamat Kamoun to the presidency, to the President's interpreter apologizes to the President, and that I didn't recognize Wenzoui's move to join the President of the CNT. This was the message that complicated matters when it arrived in Brazzaville. No sooner had this happened, the anti-Balaka resistance fighters asked for Wenzoui to be sanctioned because his behavior could lead to certain interpretations and confusions, such as the anti-Balaka resistance fighters being opposed to the appointment of a Muslim as Prime Minister, and the anti-Balaka resistant fighters not liking Muslims. It's for this reason that Sébastien Ouenezoui, who did not report on his movements to the Coordination Committee, was suspended by all the leaders of the anti-Balaka resistance movement. As for the implementation of the Brazzaville Agreement, at that time, we thought that the President, Catherine Samba Panza, would respect the terms of the agreements that had been negotiated during the forum workshops in Brazzaville. We then understood that the President was listening to other voices and had no intention of respecting the various negotiations that had taken place in Brazzaville. In the agreement, it is stated that on our return, the Central African government and the international community would fund the signatories of the agreement in order to carry out awareness-raising activities where their elements were situated, so that each group could bring these elements to respect the terms of the agreement. Nothing had been done in this direction. Even the composition of the government, the President appointed more Seleka members than those of the anti-Balaka resistance movements. she had not opened up the National Transitional Council to include representatives of the anti-Balaka resistance movement. The transitional government was made up mostly of allies of the Seleka. There was a great deal of media manipulation and certain personalities in the international community to the detriment of the anti-Balaka resistance. The president favored the Seleka by billeting them, by feeding them, without making a single gesture towards the resistance movement. Your Honors, Presiding Judge, members of the bench, everything that we had negotiated in Brazzaville had been put aside. I took the necessary time to hold meetings with the leaders of the anti-Balaka resistance in order to think about what could be done. Since neither the government nor the international community had given us a signal to go forth with the awareness-raising activities among the anti-Balaka resistance movement. And so we decided to write to the government and to the international community with a detailed budget to enable us to carry out actions in the field. But all our requests went unheeded, unanswered, right up until the very end. Mr. Presiding Judge, Your Honors, the actions carried out on the ground in favor of peace. This is what I will talk about now. I took the initiative to get out my money to send to the leaders of the anti-Balaka resistance movement to go into the field and raise awareness among their members, among their elements. I, myself, went onto the Mbaiki Road, and together we raised awareness at PK9, at Sekia, and at Kapu. We met with Sangaris after the PK9 bridge in order to explain to them the need for awareness raising and for the implementation of the Brazzaville agreements. I sent other leaders to the Boali Road and to the Damara Road. Those whom I had sent to raise awareness had problems with the Sangaris forces. These forces resisted until they were arrested, and even arrested some of these members. I didn't understand why. We wanted to apply the agreements we had signed, and I don't understand why they were standing in the way of work whose sole aim was to implement the peace agreement. I remember that this was in the month of September 2014. The president was at the UN headquarters in New York, and I was trying to get in touch with her, so that upon her return she could find a solution to ease the tensions that reigned after the arrest of the unjustly arrested leaders. However, she didn't pick up the phone. And so I tried to call the president of the National Transition Council, Alexandre Ferdinand Guende. But here too, he didn't pick up the phone. And even the prime minister that we had supported did not answer. I kept asking myself, what is going on? The international forces don't want to listen to us. And this includes the country's authorities, so there must be a problem. How can anyone be opposed to a process aimed at restoring peace? Whereas Madame Catherine Samba-Panza's mission was specifically peace and reconciliation, as well as social cohesion and the reconciliation between the sons and daughters of our country. Very curiously, each of these entities were maneuvering against the work that we had launched for the return of peace. So why were they there? That is the question that I asked myself. Presiding Judge, Your Honors, ladies and gentlemen at the bench, in my dealings with the government and the international community, I, on numerous occasions, collaborated with the representative of the UN Secretary General in the Central African Republic, His Excellency, Mr. Parfait Onyanga Anyanga. He is currently the UN representative to the African Union in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. It is with him that we worked together. We reviewed what could be done together in order to bring peace back to the country, to bring it back quickly to the country. I set forth the following proposal. I asked him if he could do everything in his might to put me in touch with the Seleka leaders in the hinterland, because it was not possible for the blood of Central Africans to continue to be shed. He asked me if I'd be willing to be put in touch with Noureddin Adam, and I acquiesced. I said I could persuade him to look in the right direction if he really loved his country. I am ready, Excellency, but this project never saw the light of day. Your Honors, Mr. Presiding Judge, members of the bench, towards November 2014, after his return to New York, or after her return to New York rather, the President invited me in for a chat. On the phone, she had told me in Sango, Ita Timbi, Tene Akega, Me Akelegere. So, in French, this translates as, there are always problems that will happen, but they can be solved. She invited me to her house in Garaba, not far from the prison, or the jail. Once I had undergone the formalities and the entrance procedures, I was taken into the reception room, and I saw Sébastien Samedi there. They were already there. She spoke in order to say that she had finally understood that it was the French who had set everything up in order to create problems for her. And this is when she made a startling revelation. And I quote, she said that because they wanted her to counsel the oil exploration contracts that Bozizé had signed with the Chinese, they wanted to bring her government down. And that she had told them that she did not have the leeway to make such decisions because she was only managing the transition, and that it was whoever came out of the elections that would have the power to do what the Constitution would allow them to do. The ambassador, Malinas, was furious against her. We were amazed that the president would give us such high-level diplomatic information. She went back to the events in point to tell me, Ngai, it's over for you. But it was the Americans who kept me going. The French wanted to get rid of me. And so I'd like to thank the Americans who allowed me to stay in place. She told me 3 or 4 times, and I understood that the event had really touched her deeply. That day, the atmosphere returned between us, a good atmosphere returned between us, and every day she sent me her political advisor, or she would call me if there was a problem that arose. Shortly afterwards, it was the Prime Minister Kamoun who called me to his official villa that was located at the intersection between the Treasury Collection Office and the BEAC. He summoned me to ask me for the support of the anti-Balaka resistance movement in order to secure the country. He explained to me that these were the wishes of the president, who wanted that the anti-Balaka resistance fighters help them secure Bangui, because the Seleka were threatening to invade the city once again. I explained that at my level there was nothing I could really do, but if he wanted, I could summon the leaders. He agreed, and so I called Charles Gremangu as well as Yvan Konate. The Prime Minister welcomed us. Gremangu and Konate explained that they needed a vehicle in order to follow their troops, their elements, afraid that there might be problems. And they also needed some financial means for coffee. Ladies and gentlemen of your bench, Your Honours, the Prime Minister gave them 5 million CFA francs. And the following day, and I was not present on this occasion, the Prime Minister gave them money in order to buy a second-hand pickup truck. And that's what the anti-Balaka resistance fighters did in order to help Catherine Samba Panza's government, her government, which was headed by Mohamed Kamoun. Presiding Judge, Your Honours, I will now talk to you about the idea that fueled my will to create the party, the PCUD. It should be recalled that after returning from Brazzaville, I had an idea. The idea of creating my own political party where I would carry out different steps for its successful completion. On the 29th of November 2014, I organized a general assembly to launch this party in a meeting room in the 20,000-seat sports complex in Bangui. And the assembly agreed on the name of the party, PCUD, which stands for the Central African Party for Unity and Development, and also agreed to adopt the text that would govern the party and send them to the Ministry of the Territorial Administration for approval, so that the party could carry out its activities in full respect of the law. I created the PCUD party because I had a certain vision for my country, Your Honor. I wanted to work for the development of my country, to put an end to the repeated crises, and to eradicate nepotism at the highest level of government, as well as to wipe out clientelism or cronyism for the well-being of the Central African population. The party's motto was unity, love, work. When I speak of unity, I mean that Central Africans are a united and indivisible people. A country has to be secular, and discrimination has to be wiped out. I mobilize Central Africans of all different faiths. The Central African Republic is not just a country for Christians and Muslims. There are also animists and non-believers, and so on and so forth, Judge, Your Honor. I had a vision to empower Central Africans, to moralize public life, and also to repatriate exiled Central Africans who had the expertise necessary to move the country forward. And I did this with an active and winning diplomacy. The pillars of development were education, agriculture, and health. These are some of the principles and part of the vision I had for my country and for my party, the PCUD. I managed to implement my vision at the Central African Football Federation, which brought together all the different members from all the different regions and all the different faiths of the country. This is a model of diversity that should be taught to all Central Africans. Your Honor, Presiding Judge, Your Honors, members of the bench, I would now like to broadcast an audio recording dated 1st of July 2014, which is already in evidence, that illustrates full well my vision as for the role of football in the peace and reconciliation process. If Your Honors accept, this is CAROTP 2042-0916, and in the transcript it is CAROTP 2088-0649, starting at line 244.
We have no problem with it, and when we are ready, we can play it. Thank you. Do we have translation also? Do the interpreters, are they ready?
The interpreters are ready to translate, Your Honor.
There seems to be a small technical problem, so.
Les joueurs solo inga que se watu la mana de parler lugna linjoni tene.
Can we please start it all over again, I think, so that we can completely follow? But it seems to work now.
Merci, je pensais la sotenti dembona dunia mobimba akembeni swaka vecteur tigangona paix beni instrument ngangumi.
Thank you. I know very well that nowadays sports competitions are a vector for peace. It's also a means for returning peace to a country, such as, and even though our country has been rattled, we will manage. A player would not be able to concentrate on their game knowing that the members of their family were suffering. You don't need to have anger or strong morale to win a game. We would not be able to have the same capacity to win a game against the Pharaohs or the Algerian Phoenix and arrive at the quarter or the eighth finals. We Central Africans, we have talent. We just need something to trigger us. But God will give us the strength and it will give it to the Federation. It will give it to the players so that the next days they can be better at these sports competitions. The President, Catherine Samba-Panza, is currently looking for the means to relaunch football in our country. And so finally, I'd like to tell the Central Africans to take example from what happened during the World Cup, the Football World Cup. This is something that really created a strong link for peace. It was not just several communities who had participated in the competition, it was the entire world. There was such a mixity, and this example of mixity in the world has to serve as a important lesson to us all here on the ground to allow us to turn the page of our history. I'd like to once again ask the anti-Balaka to love their brothers who are right now celebrating Ramadan. This is a sacred moment. Do not waste it. Do not disturb them. Respect this order as you have already been doing when it came to other orders that I have given to you these last days, and things have been going well. Let's continue on this path until peace comes back to our country definitively in the Central African Republic.
Thank you. The translation has finished. You can continue with your text, Mr. Ngai.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Your Honor. So these were some of my actions during the period upon my return to the country. Your presiding judge, Your Honor, members of the bench, members of the court, I will talk to you about the Bangui Forum. Another thing I did to help save Catherine Samba-Panza's government was that during the Bangui dialogue in 2015, this dialogue followed the Brazzaville one. And once again, the other participants in the dialogue wanted the government to be dismissed. I took the floor. To oppose this. This was in the governance thematic group. The assistance I provided throughout the Central African crisis right up until the elections in order to lead to a return to constitutional order in the Central African Republic. I supported the government's program to carry out grassroots consultations, enabling it to propose topics for the national dialogue in Bangui in 2015. I supported the government's plan to visit each locality in order to gather their opinions in order to prepare the Bangui Forum. And then I went to vote in the referendum for the adoption of the new constitution of the Central African Republic before the 2015-2016 elections.
With the approach of the elections, I also applied for the presidential and legislative elections. I submitted my candidacies. The applications were retained by the National Electoral Authority, where I met the requirements. Unfortunately for me, once the application for the presidential elections arrived at the Constitutional Court, this court found a hardly recommendable means to sideline me from the elections. And with quite ridiculous reasons, Your Honours, that Mr. Ngai had incurred a debt with the local bank. End of quote. I found these reasons absurd because it wasn't me as a physical person who had taken out this loan from the bank. It was the family company that had taken out the loan. And as such, it was a dispute between the bank and the company Établissement Ngai ssona, because at the time of the crisis, I wasn't able to respect the repayments. And at the same time, the ANE validated my candidacy for the legislative elections of Nana Bakassa. Madam Catherine Samapanza's government asked me to withdraw my application and annul my candidacy. And the problem was when the judges of the administrative tribunal wanted to issue the judgment, when they withdrew for deliberations, they were surprised by the President of the Council of State bursting in, Eugene Gugia, and he issued the message from the presidency saying, the presidency orders you to outright annul the legislative candidacy of Mr. Ngai ssona. End of quote. Certain angry judges immediately left the deliberation room. Magistrates such as Alexandre Dédé, and they started shouting. All the people who were there to await the deliberations, they all heard my lawyer as well, and my representatives who were all there. They had been following every step of the proceedings. The magistrates were surprised to see somebody burst in on them. The president of the court, Madame Nadina Pingama, was not in a good mood when she issued the decision, because she had been told, she'd been ordered to downtread the law. So during this period, my supporters demonstrated, but I called for calm and not to fall in the trap of the authorities who want to create a crisis to prolong the transition. And that is the reason why I issued multiple statements with a view to discouraging the demonstrations. Now, during the elections of 2015-2016, and after the invalidation of my candidacies in all elections, that is legislative and presidential, I chose to support the candidacy of Mr. Touadéra. At the time, after a meeting, a heavily discussed meeting with my staff, we unanimously decided to support the candidacy of Touadéra. And why did I make this choice, this decision? Because during that time, Bozizé had made a declaration to ask his KNK party to support Mr. Délégué Anissé Georges' candidacy. And I did not share the same vision as the KNK party at that time. Touadéra had asked me to help him and to support his candidacy. He invited me to see him, and so I went to his house with Mokem Mukbem Jacob Bionili. He was awaiting us, and as we arrived, he told me, "My brother, I wanted to see you, to ask you to help me in my campaign of the second round, because I do not have the means. And once the elections have been won, we're going to work together." End of quote. And I told him, I agree. And the next day, I sent him my campaign team, which I had set up. And that's what I did the next day, Your Honour. At his request, I accepted to make a public statement on the Central African Radio and Ndekeluka in support of his campaign. I really helped Touadéra win the presidential elections, Your Honour, because he did not have the means. I spent a lot to support his campaign, including the purchase of campaign materials such as T-shirts, scarves, caps, umbrellas, banners, images, among others. These campaign materials made it possible to carry out a good campaign. When the other candidate managed to bring the Congolese musician for his campaign, I brought all the Central African musicians, and I made available to them a large vehicle with stage to counter the Congolese musician. And that had a big impact during the elections, Your Honour. Among other things, in the first round of the elections in Wuhan, Dolegui had scored highly and Touadéra had nothing. I also rented a pickup to provide it to Saranti, who's now National Director of the Assembly. And he was the director of the campaign at the time, and current President of the National Assembly. Came to my office at the Central African Confederation to ask me for money to purchase fuel. That's the extent to which I sacrificed my family to help Touadéra win the elections from 2015 to 2016. Your Honour, Your Honours, it is a consideration concerning my arrest, or to give certain considerations concerning my arrest in 2018. I'm very aware that I'm not here to conduct politics. There are just a few facts which I wish to bring to your attention that demonstrate that certain members of the government in place wish to sideline me from the political arena. I will present you with these facts for your consideration. And of course, it will be up to you to interpret these facts, Your Honours. For me, these facts make it possible to explain why certain people have come to testify against me in this trial. Firstly, Your Honour, when it comes to the elections of 2020, for certain members of the Touadéra regime, it was essential to find a means of sidelining me. There was no doubt where it concerned my popularity among the whole population, largely because of the football that I had managed to bring to the fore, and which gave a lot of pressure to the Central African population. What I did to bring peace at the time of the crisis in the country, and my generosity towards all Central Africans of all faiths. That's it. This popularity, which scared Madame Catherine Samba-Panza, so she used all illegal means to invalidate my candidacy for the presidential and legislative elections I spoke about earlier. Secondly, Your Honours, was the creation of my party, the PCUD. It was perceived as a threat by certain politicians. President Touadéra wanted me to be one of the activists for his MCU party, which was a project. But I answered that I had created my political party since 2014. The procedure was underway, and as such, I could not go to another party. But I would always be his ally to work with him. And in November 2017, when the PCUD accreditation had been signed, I organized the members of my party to take part in the parade of the National Day of the 1st of December 2017, and that gave rise to anger among the senior leaders of the MCU party. President Touadéra influenced Minister Georges Bokassa, who asked him to refuse to sign my application for accreditation of the PCUD party, which the minister refused to do, because there was no legal reason to reject it. It was Minister Bokassa himself who would explain that to me in my office at the Football Federation. And this is one of the reasons that angered Touadéra and pushed him to remove Bokassa from his government. A third reason was the firm position that I took against the dismissal of the President of the Assembly at the time, the very Honourable Karim Mekassoua. I was approached by the Vice President of the National Assembly at the time, Mapenzi Simporian, for a political agreement with my MPs for the dismissal of the President of the National Assembly, Very Honourable Karim Mekassoua. And immediately I expressed my concerns, and I asked him, what are the reasons for such a removal from office? And why not let him finish his term of office? And it was the President who proposed him to be elected by his peers. Why this sudden change? He explained to me that Mekassoua was hindering the President of the Republic, and often he was applying a brake onto the initiatives of the President, and for that reason the President had decided to remove him from office. So he came to see me so that I would speak to my MPs to support and accept the dismissal of Karim Mekassoua. And I told him, this is a problem. He's a Muslim. It fits very well in the geopolitical situation. So you want to dismiss him to put who in his place? And he replied to me that he had not yet decided. The next day, he left. And then the next day, two MPs came to see me at the office of the Football Federation, Aurélien Simplice Singas, the current Minister of National Education, and Honorable Mezido, on behalf of President Karim Mekassoua. And they explained to me in detail the reasons why the President of the Republic did not want to see obstacles with regards to his plan to hand over territory to the Russians from Wagner, who were already unofficially active in the country. And that's the reason why he thought that President Karim Mekassoua was a major obstacle for him. And it was necessary to use all means to dismiss him. A few days later, it was the President of the Assembly, the Very Honourable Karim Mekassoua, who called me and asked me to come and see him in his office at the National Assembly. He explained to me that Touadéra and certain Russians were arranging with the French for my arrest if ever I had to go to France to see my family, and I would be transferred to the ICC. And I asked, for what reason? He told me, do you know that Touadéra bears grudges? He's very resentful. He said, I'm aware that you refused to do his dirty work, and he massively resents you for that. but here in Bangui, he fears the reaction of the youth. And that's the reason why he's trying to arrange things with the French via the Russians so that you are arrested there. I took the decision on that day to ask my members of parliament not to support the dismissal plan put in place by the MCU party and Tuadera. Your Honours, at the time, I noted the persistent of the Republic, Martin Luther King, had given me this information that you can find in the evidence disclosed by the prosecutor at CAR OTP 2098-0200. Messages exchanged on the 30th of November and the 5th of December 2018. The former Vice President of the Assembly, Mr. Mapenzi, also informed me that Yaninji had gone to see him for help in throwing me out of the Federation. Mapenzi had refused, and he informed me about it. Mapenzi informed me that Yaninji had said to him in Cameroon, and here I quote, "You refuse to help me, but I've found another way to reach my objective," end of quote. It was later that I understood that Yaninji had misappropriated an important, considerable sum of money to pay the people that he had contacted who were involved in my arrest by the ICC. This information is available with the FIFA, Your Honours. Under the pretext of M Ngai ssona, with a debt for the expenses of the hotel, P4197 also alerted me concerning my Vice President of the Federation, Celestin Yaninji, and his involvement in my arrest by the ICC. You will also see that a particular Didier Kochimati, who had nothing to do with football, was also appointed when I was transferred to the ICC, whereas the posts of councillors of the Federation are reserved for people who have training in sport and football in particular. But he was appointed on behalf of who within the Federation? Fourthly, there was the question of the Russians, Your Honours, members of the Wagner Group. The President had sent the Vice President of the Assembly, Simporian, with 2 Russians and an interpreter to see me. They wanted that I help them through football and to carry out political smear campaigns against the French. The objective was that I would use football to prepare the youth to accept the arrival of the Wagner Russians and to bring the youth against the West in general and in particular France, so that France would leave the Central African Republic. I refused, and I explained to them that FIFA would not accept the use of political symbols within the framework of football activities, and that would give rise to sanctions. They explained to me that the President wanted to get rid of France and make all the French leave the Central African Republic, and I had to reflect well on that. I said that politics could not be mixed with the Federation. I protect Central African football. I came back, or the people came back a second time, and a third time, the same people, they called me and they asked to meet me in the restaurant Le Prestige at La Kouanga, which is situated opposite the former United Nations HQ, which today has been turned into a hotel. They continued to put pressure on me, saying that the President was very angry due to my position, and they asked me to change my attitude because the President was counting on me. I told them that I had never refused to work for the President, but that the President had to understand me. One of the 2 Russians got angry. I could feel it. And he said, with him or without him, the work would be done. I asked the interpreter to explain his reaction, and the interpreter said what I have just told you. But the reaction of the Vice President of the Assembly concerned me. He said, whatever the case, the French would leave the country. They asked me to eat with them, but I refused. And without delay, Your Honours, I called the defence attaché of the French embassy in Bangui, Colonel Depi, to explain to him what the Russians were preparing. But he didn't take account of the information that I had given to him. He told me that he was busy with the arrival of the French Minister of Defense.
Monsieur le Président, Madame.
Mr. Presiding Judge, Your Honours, members of the bench, as for the accusations levied against me, since my arrest under an arrest warrant that was issued by the International Criminal Court, I was accused of crimes against humanity, war crimes, and for the acts such as financing the anti-Balaka resistance, buying weapons and war munitions, and the preparation and the participation in meetings in Cameroon and in Paris in order to prepare for the return of Francis Bozize to power. These are very serious accusations that were leveled against me. And I'm not indifferent to these accusations, ladies and gentlemen of the court. It was as if the sky itself were falling on my head, and these accusations were very difficult for me to carry. I do not understand that the prosecutor have all the information on the genesis of the accusations against me. Accusations that were those against the butchers. The prosecutor has information on people who are specialized in rebellion, on people who are specialized in financing rebellions in order to get positions of power. The name Anti-Balaka stems from an ancestral practice which says that they will be protected by this practice, protected against the bullets that will leave the muzzles of firearms and other weapons. What I understood from the explanations of the anti-Balaka people in Bangui is that the name anti-Balaka simply means that the bullets that will leave the weapons will not be able to reach them. There's a bit of a confusion around this term balaka in Sango, because it also means machete in Sango. But in reality, what this term means is anti-balaka, meaning anti-AK-47 bullets. Presiding Judge, ladies and gentlemen, Your Honours, without justifying the crimes that have been attributed to the anti-Balaka, I would like to remind you of the genesis of the movement, that of the resistance of the anti-Balaka movement. It is nothing else than a resistance against the Seleka, who are destroying everything in their way. The resistance movement cannot be considered as a rebellion because international law gives the right to a people to defend itself. I am forcefully against this view of things, this illusion of a view of things. You cannot make light of the thousands of dead who were massacred by foreign mercenaries recruited by Jotoja. Once again, this does not in any way justify the crimes that have been pinned on the anti-Balaka against the civilian population. And I was always firmly opposed to these crimes. Certain media sources, were disseminating a gross simplification by saying that a person who looks Christian is automatically called an anti-Balaka, and if someone looks Muslim, if their morphology is Muslim, they are automatically a Seleka. This is a grave error in judgment, and this wrought havoc and confusion in the reality within my country. Today, the anti-Balaka resistance movement is being called a militia. But doing so, we forget where the anti-Balaka come from. They arose against the butchers that were the Seleka, who were mainly made up of mercenaries coming from neighboring countries, such as the squadron of the Chadian army under the authority of their president Idriss Déby, the president of Chad, or coming from further afield, such as the Ali Daras group coming from Niger. Why not ask for explanations about what happened to the main players of these crises? And I mean more clearly, Francis Bozize and Jotoja, instead of targeting people who have nothing to do with the origin of the chaos that reigned over the Central African Republic. The leaders of the foreign mercenaries who invaded the country, Michel Jotoja, he is walking around without being bothered, and this is scandalous. Presiding Judge and ladies and gentlemen of the bench, it is not the first time that a population has risen en masse against an invasion. We have all seen the footage of the Ukrainian people, Your Honor, Your Honors. We've seen the Ukrainian people rising against their Russian aggressors. I will not comment much on this point, but I would like to leave it to your appreciation, Your Honors. I did not distribute money to whomever for war. I just provided aid to help certain Central African citizens who asked me for it in order to help them survive. And I did this with an open heart and without hind thought. I asked the prosecutor to tell you what sum of money I provided to the resistance. And to whom did I give this money, specifically? And by what means did I provide this money, Your Honor, presiding judge? I would like the prosecutor to provide evidence of the money that I had sent, or how this sum of money was sent, and why did I send it? Me, myself, at the time, had a huge responsibility to look after my family that had been dispersed by the crisis within my country. And I was fighting for their very survival. And yet, this did not stop me from helping other of my fellow citizens who also were suffering in exile just as I was. Your Honours, Mr. Presiding Judge, members of the bench, as for the point on purchasing weapons and munitions, I was never involved in any purchase or arms trafficking or munitions trafficking or purchasing. In what weapons store would I have bought, were it a single weapon or a single piece of munition? Where are the invoices for the weapons I am supposed to have bought? Where are the numbers of the weapons and munitions that I purchased? Is there but a single arms trader that stood witness to say that ssona had bought weapons or munitions from them? The answer is an obvious no. What are the brand names? How much money did I pay for these items? Who did I send this military material to? In what vehicle was it transported? What were the registration plate numbers of these vehicles? What was the color of these vehicles? What was the date that this material was sent? It is easy to pin an accusation against me that for something that had never crossed my mind. I was never involved in any arms trading or arms trafficking. Let them give you the name of the person and where I met them, in which country, in which place did they deliver these weapons to me? What was the quantity of these weapons? And to which anti-Balaka resistance leaders did I provide these weapons to? In which cities and in which countries? When? At what time? I'm not a soldier, and I don't have a second to spend thinking about this. I find it absurd because I myself know nothing about weapons and weaponry, whether we're talking about weapons or munitions. And the same goes for the Turayas. I've been here for many years, and to this date, I have not seen this evidence. Your Honours, Mr. Presiding Judge, as for the FACA, I have little knowledge on the motivation driving the FACA during the crisis. As you know, I have never been a soldier. I have never been in a position to organize any kind of military operation. Your Honours, I am accused of hate speech against my Muslim fellow citizens. I have never made any statements of hate speech towards my Muslim fellow citizens. The prosecutor has not produced a single of my speeches or even a private conversation in which I would have held or I would have spoken hateful words against my Muslim compatriots. All this to say that I never had any bad intentions against any Central Africans. Neither did I ever have a thought of doing harm to any of my Muslim brethren, because it is not part of my DNA. This is something I would never do, and I swear this on my life to God. On the contrary, I get along very well with Muslims, and I have given them a lot of responsibility when it comes to my business. And I'll give you an example. Abdul Waid is someone that I put in charge of my spare parts store. Then there's Mohammed Mustafa, who we generally call in Central Africa Mustaki. And I put him in charge of my studio in Bangui before the crisis. Then there's Abu Bakr Adi, my brother, who is responsible for the building department of my business. I gave assistance to those who were located in different sites for internally displaced peoples in Bangui, the different sites that are called Ledger. There was a Muslim woman called Hajia Asta Lilian Kolongo. During my arrival in Bangui, she would often come to see me. There are Muslims who are living witnesses and who during the period of crisis got assistance from me. I could talk to you about the Imam of the Central Mosque, Tijani. I'd also like to mention Abdul Karim, who is a displaced person of the Fula community in the Gbaya Dumbia neighborhood in the 5th arrondissement. I'd like to speak about the displaced person who's also a Fula, Arun Ibrahim, or the presidents of the youth Central African Fula movement, Jaya Dumbia Ibrahim Usman. If I had any hate against Muslims, I would never had sought to go and get the large vehicle of a Muslim, Mr. Ali Baba, who was an important businessman, and yet I protected him during the crisis. Oh, I protected the vehicle rather during the crisis and gave it back to him. The same goes for the Muslims who were targeted by the population of the 8th arrondissement who wanted to harm them. And Sylvester Siaguzu helped them, brought them to me, and I harbored them as if they were my own family until the tension eased in my country. And then I brought this family to the court in presence of the prosecutor Grisege and the Dean of Judges Kokoyo. And the Imam Kobine Lamaya, the present Cardinal Nzapalainga Dieudonné, and Grogo Kiame Nicolas, who's a pastor, were also present there. They were present when the family was brought there. The family wanted to come back to my place because they felt so welcome there. The representatives of the Fula, the Peul and Muslim community that I cited earlier, I assisted them not only during the period of Ramadan, but also outside of that period, Mr. Presiding Judge. There are other situations, such as that of the family of the CEO of Steel Italia. His name is Mohammed Saleh. He had been arrested by people with bad intentions who wanted to harm him. Luckily, This was done in the presence of certain anti-Balaka resistance fighters such as Emotion Namsio, who helped them and saved their lives. They were brought to my place, to my father's place, which is where I was staying at the time, and they gave me the name of the CEO as well as his phone number. I called him so that he could come and get them. First of all, he was afraid, and so I had to send him someone to accompany him, or someone to come and get him. So these are just some examples I'm sharing with you. There are many things that I did in order to bring peace, and I accepted to help the resistance, and I advised them in order to reach a peace for our country, the Central African Republic. At the same time, I was also carrying out different actions in order to favor reconciliation and peace. For example, I contacted Juno Abba and also other Seleka members with Ongo Pareto, the current advisor to President Touadéra, Monsieur Koba, as well. The communiques that my defense team have shown you bear witness to the will I had for the return of peace in the Central African Republic.
Your Honour, Your Honours, the return to constitutional order. The constitutional order, for me, who is an ordinary man, is purely and simply to establish the rule of law in accordance with the Constitution of the Republic and nothing else. Nowhere, anywhere, is it written in dictionaries that return to a constitutional order is a synonym of a coup d'etat. It is far from a military organization, nor is it an uprising for the resistance of a people. And the return to the constitutional order, which was a project in Paris, has nothing to do with the fight for survival of the Central African population. Faced with the armada of terrorist mercenaries who invaded our country in a stampede and devoured indiscriminately the Central Africans, come from Chad, Sudan, Niger. They pillage everything they can find, without pity or remorse for the Central African people. And we want to turn a blind eye to this chaos, to take up something else that has nothing to do with this chaos. Your Honour, Your Honours, by definition, the circle means the people who share a common vision, secrets, information, and communications together. But how can one explain that I personally do not have the telephone number of the person who is meant to embody this circle in all my directories, including my email messages with him, with François Bozize, even his son, who is a superior officer in the Central African Army. I was never in contact with him with regards to military operations. How can the accounts of the circle be explained, which they want you to believe every day here? Bozize is a career soldier. He is very experienced. He doesn't need somebody like me if he really had the intention to do something in this sense. He remained President of the Republic, Chief Supreme of the Army for almost 10 years, the former aide-de-camp of Emperor Bokassa. He was General Inspector of the armies and Chief of Staff of the Central African Armies. He has brothers in arms. He has trained a lot of soldiers. He also has a lot of children who are, as well as his genealogical brothers, who are superior and junior officers in the army and in the gendarmerie. If he wanted to prepare military action, he doesn't need a poor civilian like me. So, to say that Bozize would have given me a military mission is far from the mark. I don't even know his telephone number, whether it's in Cameroon or in France or in Uganda. You will never find Bozize's number in my telephones from Cameroon or Paris or Bangui. Nor will you find that of his son, Francis, either. Your Honour, Your Honours, you can ask the prosecutor why he didn't call certain key leaders of the anti-Balaka with whom I worked for peace in the country. People such as Konate, Yvon, Lebene, Tsiri, and Kremangu. The prosecutor is focusing on the anti-Balaka resistance fighters, whereas other groups are and were active in the country, such as the APRD of Demafuth, managed by Larmassoum, the RJ of Commander Sayo, the MLCJ of Abdoulaye Miskin. It's very important for you to understand the very significant failings in the accusations of the prosecutor. I will not spend more time on certain witnesses of the prosecutor, but I want to make certain short remarks about certain witnesses. Your Honour, I think that I cannot take up this section given that the break time is coming. Should I finish here?
Yeah, I think we should indeed stop here and have the break until 11:30.
All rise for your full level.